will, as football practice, try to wait until the last possible second in the parking lot before I leave. About 5:42 or 30, they were still on the field, and then I sent a text and went on, and I was not involved at the hurry. He was on very eating more than 7 o'clock. I was loving it. I'm sure it'll be most important. Over the last few weeks, we have been talking about the journey to the promised land. And so when we talk about a journey, we are going from point A to point B. But eventually, the journey ends, right? Eventually, we get to the finish line of the journey. We talked last week about how we made it to the end, at least, of the journey. And we're there, at least on the doorstep, as it were, of the promised land. And so I decided to roll further for these lessons. So you'll notice the title has changed slightly from Journey to the Promised Land to now right in the Promised Land. Tonight's lesson is called Crossing the Jordan. We'll be in Joshua chapter 3, although everything will be up here on the screen for you here as well. But before we get into our conversation, I'm going to ask you a question to consider, because I know I'll get some good answers on this. What type of souvenirs do you like to get on vacation? What type of souvenirs do you like to get on vacation? Okay, first of all, when you started with jump, it's not a promising answer. But at least it says jump like salt and pepper shake. Yes, ma'am.
She's showing that ring.
Oh, I can see it. It's like a ring. A ring. So it's always jewelry. All right? T-shirts. T-shirts. What? Magnets. Eagles. Eagles, okay. So space, something that's very symbolic. Maybe a bottle like, so we had some fruit cars went to Africa years ago, they brought like a wood carved animal. Rhinoceros, that's what it was. They brought back. So maybe something from the slide. Eloise, you got to say something? A little bit of jewelry, all right? See, what y'all know is I'm setting this up. Next time y'all go on vacation, y'all know to bring stuff back. That's what it is. What is vacation? It's the day you don't have to take anybody to the doctor. And that's what you get about 3 every year, I think. It's what it is. And so, when you think about like a souvenir, something you bring, t-shirts, postcards, magnets, all those kinds of things. I would imagine that once this journey was complete, I'd say they were not done with no souvenirs, they didn't want anything there. To this point, everything that we have looked at is centered on the first 5 books of the Old Testament. There's 4. We don't use that in a whole lot. This is just 4. But for the next few weeks, we're going to be in the book of Joshua and the book of Judges. So when I say go to Joshua 3, that means in the 4 weeks. The book of Joshua tells of the Israelite campaign, the destruction of their enemies, and then ultimately the division of the land amongst the 12 tribes. There's a decent chance that your Bible in the very back has some maps, maybe on the back. But if you look at that map, on the back, it'll show you the 12 tribe division. And some of them have more land, some of them have less, and some of them are water, some of them not. And those maps are just not perfect. It does give you an idea of where these people sell. But you So, what we have to do though, before we get anything, we have to cross the Jordan. So what we are going to look at this evening is a little bit about that story. This is Joshua. We're going to read verses 14 through 17 here to start with. Please be sure to read this before. So I think there's 2 slides.
So it was for the people set up from their camp across over the Jordan, with the priests bearing the ark of the covenant before the people. And those who bore the ark came to the Jordan, and the feet of the priests bore the ark of the Jordan overflowed knowledge and the whole and the waters came down from to the sea and flowed in a heap very far away and ever. So the waters that they had in the sea of the above the top sea failed and were cut off, and the people crossed the opposite Jericho. Then the priests who bore the ark of the covenant of the Lord stood firm on dry ground against the Jordan, and all Israel crossed over on dry ground until all the people crossed the sea.
So as we read this, as we see this, a couple of things that we come across. We read this story of the Jordan, and how does it describe the water of the Jordan, at least at this time of year? It says it's overflowing. It says it's time of harvest. And so we look at this the same way that we would here. It's not uncommon for us to drive somewhere in, say, April and see a really time, right? It's also not uncommon to come across somewhere in July and see a pretty much like I rode out from Long Beach to the Goshen Road a couple weeks ago, and there is a creek called York Creek. But it would be hard to call it a creek because it was completely dry. When you go up there, that time's and so this is the story, the time that they're crossing, the water happens to be high. What's the potential negative of water being high? Ground hard to travel. You can drown in it. All of those sound bad, right? None of those are great situations right here. And so as we read this, it says the priests who were carrying what with them? Priests who were carrying the Ark of the Covenant, they had to step down into the water. Now think about that for a second. Stepping into the water required a little bit of water. Required a little bit of faith that you do. It required a little bit of effort. It wasn't just a well, this will all fix itself. They had to step down in while they were carrying this Ark. Now, the Ark was always described as a representation of God. Right? Why was the Ark a representation of God? And mercy, God, as well as for God to give sin. Also, they carried the word of God's power. Well, I know there's one that decided to do it over right. But usually God will go with it. So it's our visual representation. So when Jimmy said that it took a little effort, and when Mike said it took a little bit of faith, they stepped in, but carrying that ark, essentially they're stepping in with what? With God with them. So God was with them in this experience. So God will be good people through this obstacle. Now, have we ever experienced something in our lives where it seemed humanly impossible? You ever done something that, or you heard something, or experienced something that you thought would have been just impossible? I won't ask you to tell me, but you can at least consider that right there. I sort of skipped ahead without why do you think God waited until the priest's feet touched the water before stopping prayer? It's kind of test of faith right here, right? You know, if you go out to the York Street in July, they all faith will step into there, right? It's not required at all. But when the water is rushing, it's a little more dangerous. So perhaps as a challenge to their faith. Now, the second one, how is this story similar and also different from the story of Moses and the Red Sea? Let's do similar first. What similarities do we see? Dry ground. So water that becomes dry. So we got there's a water-based story. What's different? It didn't really require, don't hear me wrong, the Red Sea crossing required the faith to get the seas crossed. Right? I mean, it did once it was easy. But this story right here required faith to actually step in. So a little bit of difference here with that. Which one do you think would be more nerve-wracking? The Red Sea story or the reverse? Well, I was gonna say there may be some, I'm not having to go swimming kind of boats and crowd right here. But if you step out, let's just say you step out dry land, there's water on both sides. Well, it's dry, but what's the worry? All right. The worry, every now and then, maybe the best example that we can think about is every now and then you see dams that break or dikes that spill over. And so 100 times a road, you walk down that road, there ain't nothing there. But with that dam sort of shake this a little bit, right? So maybe not, but we still makes a good point. How deep is this water we're about to step into right now? That's a little shaky as well. What if it's 10 foot deep and you are gone and just like so what is there a right answer? Probably for each person that would experience it completely different, depending on what it was. But both of them, whether it's dry with water on the side, or water that we have to step into first, how can we show faith that moves before we see results? So when we think about faith, faith that requires no action, what would be the problem with that? You know, in 1 Corinthians, Paul writes that faith, hope, and love, the greatest is love. There'd be no need for faith and hope when this life is hope. Why is there no need for faith when this life is hope? We being God present. So by definition, we said this before, but by definition, faith is a nervous thing, right? There's something that is unexperienced in there. And so it requires a little faith. It requires to take a jump. It might require for when people get to take a job. It requires a set of things, right? We'll sit away from my comfort zone. Several of you went to the military. I was talking about that the other day. You was in the military, right? First day in the military, being first day in the military. Living, right? Well, it's different, but you got to step out. Yeah. What about the 10th day? Was it better than the first one? What about the last day? Was it better than the first day? It was. But you get, once you test things, you know things. And so when we step out in faith, is that we step out and we will see the results later. When they step into this Jordan River, they're stepping into the potential of something bad might happen. And that it would. Now, you don't have to answer this question, but I do want you to think about this question because it's a very similar question to what we asked a few weeks ago about the Red Sea. But are there Jordan rivers that pop up in our life? Yes, probably so, right? I said no answer it. becomes the Jordan River for you? The answer to this question would be maybe whatever it is, it requires a stepping out. Things that sometimes don't seem too much. Now, what should now happen? Can you think of an example of a Jordan River in your past that you're glad that you stepped out? Well, nervous to start with, but it worked out for better. Again, I'm asking you to give an example, but if you think about that, things that seem like risks, things that seem like steps that we took in faith that came away effective. Any comments before we go on to the next one? So, this is Joshua chapter 4. We're going to read verses 1 through 9. Joshua 4, 1 through 9. Maybe you can read this.
Came back, I will be with the leader of the door. And the Lord spoke to Joshua, saying, take for yourself 12 men, one man every man that take for yourself 12 stones from here, out of the midst of the door. Place for the priest to the front. You should carry them over with you, and leave them in the lodging place. Then Joshua got the 12 men with he had appointed, children of Israel. One man every man. Joshua said, cross over the ark of the Lord your God, next to the door. Each one of you take up a stone on your shoulder, according to the number of the tribes of the children of Israel. This may be a sign among you that the children ask, how to tell the same. What do these stones mean? And you shall answer them. The waters of the Jordan were cut off before the ark of the covenant. And the waters of the Jordan were cut off. This song shall be before the children of Israel oppressed. And the children of Israel did. Just as Joshua commanded. Took upon the stone that was midst of the Jordan. And the Lord had spoken to Joshua. Ordered the number of tribes of the children of Israel. Carried them over with it, like they are. Laid it down. Then Joshua said unto the 12 stones, the place where the feet of the priests bore the rod were do. They are spared.
All right. So, if you have listened to the sermon, talk about this actually on Sundays, Joshua. You may remember when they sent the 12 spies into the land. It took for you see the same thing right here. God commanded Joshua to have 12, one from each tribe, take stones from the riverbed and set them up as a reward. Okay? Little things, stones from. How many of you have ever taken a stone out of the river? That might be a souvenir that you feel, right? You might have been somewhere in the mountains or somewhere near the ocean or something like that. You saw a pretty stone, you took that. And you maybe put that on the mantle or put it beside your bed. When you see that rock, you remember that river in Colorado or that ocean in the beach in Florida or wherever it might be. But you use that as a memorial. You use that as something to help you remember. That's what Joshua commands from these 12 men. And notice here, one from each tribe. Why might it be that they did one from each tribe? Everybody had a part in it, right? Everybody had a part in it. And whatever the part is, you play a role in it. Because all of these people have ventured through this together. And they've all made mistakes. They've all done wrong. But we're all part of the group that's come up through here. So there was the stones here serve as a memorial. They decorate. They also make a declaration of God and Lord. Hold on one second. Head first.
If we take those stones, we take the rock, with grease, and put them on your shoulder. So these are going to be big, massive rocks. One at the 12 thing. These are big rocks.
I thought he was going to answer your question. That's why I said, Lucy will ask the same question about outside. If you're building a memorial, think about there, it said they set up 12 stones in the midst of the Jordan, in the place where the feet of the priests before the Ark of the Covenant stood, and they are there to this day. So it seems to me like that it was out of the water. But also, if we go back to it, it said the water was overflowing, right? So if you think about,
That was just kind of where it was like setting something the other side.
it's hard to give you, I don't know that we can really
And
answer
then
that.
whatever it came up.
Sure, if you think about like this aisle being water, but when it floods, it's going to be over on Leland, it's going to be over on Jimmy. If I look at Washington Leland, if when it floods, and the county will put it back to normal, they'll see it's going to be right there. But you know, that might be a choose your own adventure kind of question for that. We'll see. Well, I think that, I don't know that this will still be there today. I think as they tell the story, I think that's the symbolic, that we didn't just kick them out and throw them, this was written down. It'd be hard to say that.
And this is Joshua looking back on the event that had occurred, we much later than they took place.
So it's more of a reflective on anything else. Yes, ma'am. So, where we at? I'm sorry. That is moving around. That's a good question. I'm listening on it.
Whatever, yes, that's our verification.
Sure. And I think too, we can also look at this for with a certain technicality that may or may not be necessary. I'm not sure how, but things are memorials. Maybe think about it this way. When we talk about memories in the past, things that happened to us. If you tell me a story of something that happened 50 years ago, do you tell the story? Are you sure the story is 100%? And I say that not for everything, but a memorial is meant to invoke specific memories. I'm not saying lifelong, I'm just saying that there's, I do think that you make a good point. Fixing
This goes back to the compliment I'm giving you sometimes. First heard you speak, you take me right there. I was right down there in that group, picking up those rocks and thinking about what they did. And that's what makes your speech so good.
Well, I appreciate that. There's also a chance that if you really like David, watch Jimmy and he's from, we make it real.
I know.
What are some ways that Christians can, I put this in information, build memorials to remember what God has done for us? What's up? Sure. And that's sort of a designated memorial that's meant for that purpose. Sure. Sure. What else?
I've got questions, mountains, we're talking about when you do try to handle from the Bible verse that you find.
Just as we said at the beginning, a souvenir from a trip helps you remember. We have these sort of mental souvenirs, as it were, that we can use there as well. Now, Esther will do this right now. She's got a whole bunch of stuff that needs to be moved, right? So, if we have a memorial, if we have something that's meaningful to us, and we throw it in, and we throw it out there, and we never look at it again, it's not really a memorial, right? It's just some. So this is essentially, why is it important for us to share our memorial with other Christians rather than just overlap? Those build the faith. Sure. We're told to. The others?
When you become a Christian, you start having spiritual needs, you start having that's what it is.
This kind of leads us into this third question. But how does remembering God's past faithfulness, how does that memorial that we sort of set aside or that we've made as something to help us remember, how does that actually help us when we're actually next door?
If we have a tendency to focus on the negative, impact things, if I remember these times that God was in the past, it was not.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yes. Nobody has that love. You all know this, but they'll have that love-hate relationship with the Israelites. It is true. You got every week tonight, she's kind of fussed about it. Why ain't they ever figured it out? We do the same. But if we have these sort of past experiences and we don't draw on them, they're not going to help us, right? They're not going to be able to help us at all. We should use that. God was with us last time I was there. Will God be with us the next time I was there? There's faith involved in that. Say again. Yes, a mirror. Definitely. We look in the mirror and see a whole lot of ourselves. Let's go a little further. This is Joshua 4, 10 through 14. Jill, you care to read this? Yeah. Nice. So, Dan said this a minute ago, this is sort of a reflection on things that happened back. We're beyond Moses and some of the other things that we talked about right here. But there's a couple things to notice here. First of all, it said that the priest who bore the ark stood in the midst of the Jordan until everything was finished the Lord had commanded. So they stood there. I read that as they stood there and they waited for everyone to go across. We're talking about leadership. We're talking about this. What can we learn from the priest's willingness to stay in place until everyone was across the river? How does that reflect obedience and leadership?
Perseverance. After a while, you get forget. You got to be willing to suffer. You got to be willing to others. They may have heard. Try to do the backwards, mostly. Being a rude, well, inside it, usually they have heard. Without legal enforcement, which is a responsibility. Everybody. We have to.
There was, if you got all these people crossing, you let the first 2 or 3 cross, and let's get it up. Well, that doesn't happen. The people in the line had just as much faith as the people in the white line, right? And so they had to step in just as much. So the priests were there. So this question is a little bit longer. There's 2 parts to it. But how does obedience to God or strengthen leadership and unity in the church? I want to ask that leadership part of being able to talk. Deacon and elder, just sort of designated leadership position. How does obedience to God or strengthen?
To you, you're more likely to follow the example for God. Because I say, people operate
Leading by example. And so if people see someone in leadership, be they the military leader, be they the law school, be they the leader of church, whatever it might be, then that's an example that we follow. Now let's start down to the second question. What are ways in which Christians, and this is a question for all of you but not within, can support church leaders in their work? How can you be supportive of whoever the leaders will be in church? More specific, what do you mean? Okay. Yeah. No, the first question is why, right? Somebody's like, be to be prayerful for inclusive people want to do us. For some of us, in the second question, there are some tasks that some of us can't do, right? Just as it's what it, if we're doing some kind of heavy lifting here, I'm not gonna have Shorty out there doing it, right? That's not a realistic task. But I guarantee that Shorty's gonna say thank you to people, right? And Shorty will be the first to be able to bring water, whatever whatever that might be. And so there are tasks in the church that we can't do. But we just can't say, well, that's so-and-so, so I'm not going to worry about it. We can still be active. And that absolutely is. And I think, and I'm sure they will do the same for them, and they did that's fire coming apart.
All the elders, the elders and the deacons, compliment them when you go out. The church said, well, thank you for doing this and this and this, whatever it happens to be. But I don't know of anyone that doesn't like a compliment, especially when they've been working hard. They want to be recognized for it. There are a lot of people say, oh, that's already the same thing. I think people appreciate it.
I think if we look around the room, we think about the various activities within the church, or even without the church. When we look around the room, everybody plays a pivotal role in those things. And it's not that, well, the deacons do everything, the elders do everything, preachers do everything. All of you play a significant role in it. And just like you might say, thank you to the preacher, I think you say just as much thanks, if not more, to the members for various roles that they play within the church, like I said, even things outside the church. But that's unity, right? And if we're doing everything, my whole goal here tonight is for all 20 of you to run straight up and say, boy, you did a good job. And I'm not approaching it from the right angle. I'd rather you not know, because it makes me nervous when you do that. But if my whole goal is the same, right? That is not the right approach. I wouldn't ask, I know everything most honestly, because they pretty bad, but unity comes when we're willing to compliment and sacrifice and work with and for each other. And the elders should be taskmasters to the Christians, to the church. But also, as Jimmy said, the church shouldn't say why every possible suggestion that comes up from, push back on everything there as well. Did we see the Israelites push back on the leaders? Absolutely did. Yes, sir.
In verse 10, 5, verse 17, the elders who do well are to use to the word of God, especially those who work hard.
Yes, sir. It certainly does. It certainly does. Other comments? We're going to the last bit. Thank you.
I don't know if my kid didn't cook it.
That is true. But it's nice to have people that can fill all of those spots there. You know, that it's true. It's very nice. So the last thing, this will finish up for us. This is Joshua chapter 4, verses 15 through 24. Who do you care to read? They set up the memorial zones, which I think answers our question from earlier about since the river went back to the flood spot, they set it up to an area where it wasn't. And again, you have to sort of in pieces, kind of paint our picture so down on how this would make it look. But it said that they are to remind the people, right? They're there to remind the people. And it said that something where when we go back 100 years from now, the kids say, oh, what are these there for? You know, say, right? They're here as a memorial for what it is. God has been faithful, God has been helpful to them. It showed, though, I think this is important, that the God of the Israelites was a living God. Right? Most of the gods, all the gods that we see throughout the Bible in the Old Testament, and even like with the Greeks in the New Testament, they weren't living gods, but rather they were gods. Or with an eye, they were alive. And they had things bestowed upon them. You know, there was a god of fire. And so anytime there was fire, this idol was credited for. But it didn't shoot fire out of the idol. Right? But this was a living God. It was different from something that you would just look at as an idol, you just worship there. And I think it's important for us to know that God is a living God, right? Important for us. And so this is our last question. In what ways does God still use his people, us, to make his name known to the nations? How do we tell the story today the same way that he said thousands of years ago, tell your kids I think that's honestly where this frustration was talking about. I think that's what comes in. The story is there to be right? Because it's what the leader of us that same thing for God. How do we feel not even like what it is that we go all around the world? I don't get it. that we still have already tell her. He didn't look, we show his on it. And actually, what we try, they're positive, very helpful, whatever, the days might be. So that we should keep children all. That's why we're, I think that's how we see here in the story. Go back, 100 years ago, go back and look at this, and there's a story to tell, and maybe those people can go back and see that and think, oh, my God, there's some hard times. But I'm not the only person who went through some hard times, right? It took a lot of faith for these Israelites to come this whole way, even when they were there, it's not required a lot of faith in their Any questions before we wrap up? We could say that it required Israel to cross the Jordan by faith. I think we can all agree that, but we have to step forward in faith as well. So we can take steps well. They get done this day, and not even talk about it right now. But we have to stay firm for others, for ourselves, and for God. So we have to stand firm in that. And when we stand firm with the clarity that God is our God. And I would hope that people God it has to be God. And whatever decision you make, well, that'll be what you have to make. I have to make my own decision. I have to stand firm for that. I have to trust in the power of God. That's all that is it for that. I have to trust in the power of God to sustain. Not just moving forward, keeping with where I am. I have to trust in the power of God to move forward. And the greatest promise of God is that when this life is over, we'll have a whole heaven. That's the greatest promise. But that's not be taken on faith, right? Because we're not able to go to heaven and go back. So it requires faith. But trust that there's a book full of promises fulfilled, and that God will promise that last, fulfill that last promise. For us, to get into God in order for that promise to be fulfilled. So we still be patient each time that you might need that